with a promise to fund more studies. Because you don't allow harm to take place while you conduct studies. You actually stop the harm and then conduct the studies to see if it's worth it. And and if I'm not mistaken, Dr. So actually talks about this and End of Gender and how these studies are being cut off by trans activists. It's not the other way around.
I'll
So could
have.
I
Yeah, go
respond?
ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
please.
thank you. So you're kind of like you kind of very much brushed off the fact like I went under conversion therapy is enacted upon thousands every goddamn day, especially in the United States. The UK has just recently put a ban on conversion therapy and is still debating whether it should include trans people as well. It is a horrible practice that literally scars thousands for their lives, and they're still just coming out because it's been practiced for so many eons, thanks to the popularized idea of hyper hegemony masculine culture of sexualizing women and men. Like that's the reality of what a woman really is at the end of the day. So what do you do for the thousands that are being tortured right now and being forced to something that they are not? That is happening, but in the opposite way that you're arguing.
Well, it's also happening in the other direction as well. Like we talked about tomboys can't be tomboys anymore. And so, but the thing is you're right. And I agree that, I don't think many people agree that we should be having conversion therapy. The problem arises when you look at conversion therapy bans and you look at it in terms of trans people. A lot of, therapists are going to be concerned that if you enact these bans, then they won't even be able to push back on the ideas and ask the key questions that that they can, because that they need to. And so that's the concern. But I think in terms of true conversion therapy, like if you're trying to force people to identify in certain ways, that's not right. And that's why I think we can get these children who are identifying, if we can get you can get them to an age where it's appropriate for them to transition and work with them on the mental issues that they have to get them to that state to where we can finally get them to adulthood. Then yes, they can transition once they get to adulthood. But right now we don't the medical malpractice that we're seeing is being pushed on children. It's not, it's being seen as transitioning is this magical cure for gender dysphoria, which it's not.
So all source and Colin just wrap it up. Maybe all source you go first just to balance it out after Sarah, and then we'll go with Colin for the final words. And just for the audience, I forgot to mention it throughout the space. I've pinned it above. I'll retweet it on my account. It's a newsletter, so we recap entire discussions because we've been going on for many hours in a newsletter. So you can go on the top pinned tweet or on my profile, and you could subscribe to the newsletter there. But as we wrap it up, all source, you've been on a few spaces together. I'll give you the mic, and then we'll go to Colin, who's been patiently waiting.
No, yeah, I just kind of want to push back a little bit on one of Sarah's point, like this idea that postmodernism has kind of infiltrated our schools, and where I would kind of disagree with that is I think never, you know, generations have ideological preferences. Right? We see this throughout American history, and generally, what we see historically, what we've seen is that younger generations in American history tend to be more liberal, and then the older they get more conservative, right? And where that break happened was actually the millennial generation, which, if anything, they're becoming more and more and more and more and more progressive, rather than more conservative the older they get. We're seeing a more tilt to progressivism, and we're kind of seeing that the same with Gen Z. I think this idea that there's somehow this deep state or propaganda effort or something above, especially teenagers and Gen Zs, that a lot of them are now going into college, that forces them to have this certain political belief. I think that is wrong. I think you have to acknowledge and accept that a lot of generations, specifically Gen Z, had the most amount of access to information that any of us have ever had when we were growing up. Right? Their ability to research is unparalleled. And this is somebody, like, for my account specifically, I know I get into Mario's spaces to talk politics, but I cover cartels in my main account in Mexico, right? I can promise you I have leveraged younger people extensively for tools and research, especially in open source, and their ability to do things that blows my mind because they're just that well connected. And I think the problem is, and I think this is from a millennial point of view, is that when there's a push for a certain where, because a lot of people in my generation viewed gay rights as human rights. And I think for the Gen Z, I see, and you just go to a high school, they see trans rights as human rights. And when there's this societal backlash from older generations saying, no, you cannot do this, when you see these laws getting passed and saying, no, this is wrong, you're losing that generation in that political sphere because they had their ability to form their own political opinions. And then the general acceptance that a lot of Gen Zs have might be radical for older people, but for them, it's just the natural idea that they have. I've met so many kids in high school that for them, gender identity and sexuality is a stupid debate. Like, they don't care about this. It is not something that keeps them up at night. It's not something that for them personally, they go through and debate. Oh, it's just natural for them and it's normal and it's accepted. Where they push back is when they see older generations saying what your belief is wrong. And we've seen in American history when that happens, the generation that then carries on that fight will prevail. And I think the more you try to push, and we can have debates and conversations about young, people and gender, changing your gender when you're a child. I get that. That's fine. But that is not what this debate is about. The debate that we're having, and when the pronouns and trans and using she, he, him, her, it's vilifying trans people. And I think that's what is being lost about a lot of people when they're talking, when you have trans activists here. I'm not a trans activist per se. But when you're having these conversations with trans activists, all they're trying to say is we exist. And I think Virtual said it beautifully. I just want to go to the bathroom in peace. And I think we can all look in American history when the last time we had conversations about bathroom and segregation, how that became a huge issue in our politics and in civil rights. And the way we're framing this makes it look as a similar fight as we had during the civil rights era.
Colin, the mic is yours.
Yeah, thanks for having this. Really appreciate it. So I always want to close by sort of addressing something you said, Mario, where you made a statement about language evolution and how words always change meanings, sometimes to be more accepting or inclusive. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as we can retain the ability to describe objective reality. But that's, in my view, exactly what a lot of the gender activists are trying to prevent us from doing. So if younger generations were just defining boys and girls according to sexist stereotypes, that would still be sexist and regressive, but it wouldn't be as bad as I think what's happening right now, because what's happening isn't simply words taking on new meanings, but rather activists introducing a medical component for those of one sex who identify or behave in ways that's more typical of the opposite sex. This is how transgender is being literally defined now, and the medical establishment is going along with this. Just for one quick example, the American Psychological Association, they define transgender as an umbrella term for persons whose gender identity, gender expression, or behavior does not conform to that typically associated with the sex to which they were assigned at birth. So with this, the logical progression of this is, if you're a girl who likes trucks, that means you're transgender because this is a behavior that's not typically associated with being female. A boy with long hair, you're transgender as well because this is a sex atypical gender expression. Under this definition, which is, again, literally used by our major medical and scientific institutions now, masculine girls and feminine boys are trans because their behavior doesn't match traditional expectations of their sex. And the medical component here swings into motion by telling these totally normal children that they have a mismatch between their mind and their body, but that this mismatch can be fixed if they want it with puberty blockers, hormones, and surgeries. So I would just argue that this is not just merely language evolution. This is allowing a medical scandal of enormous proportions to just keep on rolling and mitigate it. So that's how I'll end.
Virtual Lily, I'll let you quickly respond just so we can wrap up the space.
Yeah, Narius, thank you very much. So, I just kind of wanted to, throw this kind of, hypothetical out there. So, it's a case of, what if we just, accepted the, what you are presenting as, the case of, men and women are biologically down to their things, and that trans people don't exist, and that non-binaries don't exist, intersex, all this kind of thing. What if we went into that situation, example, like tomorrow, hypothetically? Well, you're going to have a really hard time because there are already so many people who are just happy, existing, living, and just trying to do their daily things. And the government is now forcing them to do things that they don't want to do. And now to a point where it's fearful, it's scary, it's borderline, coming up to a genocide in a sense, thinking along, very harmful ways that affect I said like real actual people. And on this hypothetical, you're just going to have people who are lost because you would perceive them very much so on the street every single day, walking across them. You'd be like, yeah, cool. I perceive the person as you do, and their biology, which unfortunately you don't carry a microscope with you at all times. You don't check their chromosomes to see if whatever the reality thing is you're perceiving. It makes absolutely no sense. And when you start enacting on these potential laws that are harmful for usual living people who pay their taxes and do things, buy coffee, it's ludicrous. It starts getting ludicrous about who the people are you're going to affect by pushing these archaic and very dangerous views on. And just to simply just turn around and be like, hey, girl, and they turn around and be like, actually, it's dude. You'd be like, all right, cool, dude, can I get some coffee? Is that so hard? Is that really so hard at the end of the day?
Slayman, Nick. Whew.
It's been quite a touchy debate, pretty robust debate.
But I would conclude, Nick, I would conclude the following. I don't know what the audience thinks because the comments are going a bit crazy on both sides of the argument, which is good because even the comments are, or at least were earlier when I checked it, were a bit more balanced. I'm not sure about now. But I feel like if you the common things among most speakers in this case is everyone is fine with transgenders. Not everyone, but most speakers are fine with transgenders. Most, definitely not all, but at least earlier, because we've had many panelists earlier, we're fine with using pronouns if asked respectfully, and they were using the appropriate pronoun before. And I think what really triggered a lot of people is two things. Number one is being obliged to use a pronoun, because the free speech argument comes in. At least many people view it as such. Others argue that no, it's considered hate speech if you use the right pronoun. But that argument is one of the big ones. And then the second one is children. How can we, like All Source did a great job in the example he gave, like how can you educate kids without going too far in the view of some? So these are the two topics, 2 points that I thought were the most polarizing. What do you think, Slayman and Nick?
Yeah, I agree. I think when it comes down to it, children are the main issue that most people are concerned with, because essentially your children are your heritage, and you want to ensure that they're given an upbringing that is better than what you received, and they receive the values or shared values, even though you want them to learn other things. The concern is, and I can speak about the United Kingdom. I didn't give my views throughout this space because I was trying to be balanced as possible. If not, I was basically trying to support the other side as much as possible. But the biggest concern is that, and I can give United Kingdom as an example. I don't know how it is in the United States. The biggest concern is that children, basically, there's LGBTQ values that are being, children are being forced to learn them. And then the concern is that they're so young, they're so impressionable that they're going to be conditioned into thinking in a certain way and a certain idea. And so that's why you get this level of passion, because I think if it was adult on adult, you can deal with it, you can deal with the ideas, but everybody knows young minds are easily controlled.
Would you agree, like some level of education is important, so that the example that All Source gave is a good example.
Yeah. So I'd say education in all fields, in all areas, is based on your age range. For example, you're not going to learn indices when you're in year 3. So you're not going to learn complicated psychological ideas when you're 8, 7. So yes, there should be a time when they learn it, but I would say age 4 to at least age 12 is maybe too young. And so that's the main concern what people have.
Yeah.
Nick,
so
what do you think?
To kind of go on his point just a little bit, kids are the most vulnerable people in our society, and it is our job to protect those kids and not let them be I guess educating them on certain topics.
You gotta mute Slayman. Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
Oh, sorry. I guess there is a line between education and indoctrination. I guess we got to find that line. But if we're getting to the point where some teachers are being accused of maybe, let's say this the right way, of grooming children, that's one of the quotes, or that's one of the accusations, and it's something that probably needs to be investigated because kids should be our number one priority. So I think this is going to be an ongoing conversation, and it's probably going to get even more
And Nick,
intense as time goes
I
on.
think you hit the nail on the head there, because the other concern is this: there's no balance in schools anymore. So if you had equal amount of teachers from both sides of the aisle, maybe you think your kid would get a holistic education. But I can give, again, UK example. Kids are very much left leaning. There's no conservative ideas being stated in schools. So that's a secondary concern why, again, people have these kind of issues.
Yeah, I've actually did a tweet. I pinned it. I pinned it in my profile as well. Like, I'm curious for the audience. Like, would you use a gender pronoun if asked respectfully by someone? I'm gonna go through the comments. I actually asked my team to go through the comments because it's got 9,300, so it's gonna take a while. Yeah, so I asked that question I think earlier today or yesterday, to get a sense of people's position on this. But I do want to say on education, like on the gender one, I don't care. As long as like free speech gets tricky, but using someone's gender if it makes them happy, of course I would. Like I wouldn't even think twice. Like it makes them happy. Now, obviously, there's when you use someone's gender, when someone's pronoun, that could go against some of the beliefs that you have, and that's where it gets tricky for some people. And I understand that. But in terms of education, I really can't have a stance because I don't know how it's being taught to kids. I'm not an expert in that field, but I do understand the concern that some people have. Also, I understand the importance of educating kids, but also did say that, also as example, did make a point that like my carers didn't really care. It took me like one sentence, they understood it, and they moved on with their life. Like I think if we want to have our society be more accepting, it's important to teach everything to our kids. But then it goes to Slayman's point is when, they are very vulnerable. When should you teach them such complex topics that take us hours and hours to understand? So it's tricky. That one is a bit trickier for me. The pronouns one, using someone's pronoun is fine, but I'll give Kef, I'll give you a virtual Lily final word. I see both of your hands up very, very quickly, 5 seconds. Final thoughts, but respectfully, because I brought you up on stage despite multiple attacks on other speakers. But I'll give you the final word, and hopefully it's an inclusive word and a positive word for everyone.
I appreciate it. I think that open dialogue is really important. That's something that's really lacking in today's society, as a lot of us end up getting into echo chambers on both the left and right of the political spectrum. And, despite a lot of heated disagreements, I think overall this was a positive experience. I've learned a lot. Like today, for instance, I learned from Colin Wright that I'm one of the founders of gender ideology, which honestly, very cool. I didn't know I did that. So thank you all for letting me.
Appreciate it for coming. Appreciate it. Thank you, Kefals. Virtual Lily, any final quick words as well before I end the space?
Yeah, no worries. I just kind of wanted to touch on the idea of education in class about, LGBT issues and all this kind of thing. What I want to say is what about the current straight hegemonic heterosexual education that we currently get in education schools since for centuries that has been forced on kids, and there have been gay kids all over the place for thousands of years. So what about this? We could also argue in one direction as well the other way. What about this forced straight way? Not for gay people.
It just shows how complex the issue is. I'd love you to come in and do another space on this for sure.
So thank you.
We'll not at all, and we'll do another space to continue discussing those points. For the audience, I hope you found the panel balanced. We tried our best. We actually delayed the space multiple times to try to find that balance. And, we kicked it off. It was a bit tough in the early stages. Dr. Drew faced some technical issues, but it went pretty well. I'm happy with the result. Appreciate you all. And we'll see you probably the next space, unless there's some break.